have to adjust these. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank the Division of Emerging Media and the many other sponsors of this exciting event. It's been really fruitful days for me so far. I'd like to thank Lee for sharing this panel. And I'd also like to say thanks Sarah Krongrad for her logistical and organizational brilliance. I'd also like us to acknowledge the land on which BU sits as the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people, a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations, on which in many ways we are uninvited guests. And it's important at an event focusing on the face and its recognition that we also recognize the legacy of settler colonialism and its effects on the technologies and social worlds we inhabit today. So my training is in history and media studies and in science and technology studies. And so I'm always fascinated by images like this because there's just so much going on in all of those different fields in an image like this. Right? And so we have this dark void, we have these two screaming faces, one human and kind of schematic, one a panda, a cute cartoon panda. And there's a man, there a small man in jeans. And this is the launch of Apple's Animoji, which were released to the world in September of 2017 as part of the iPhone X. Apple described these animated facial characters, there were 12 of them in all, including a robot, an alien, and the famous pilot Pooh, as a new and more nuanced way to communicate feelings with friends and family within the Apple Messages chat application. But the avatars work using facial recognition data collected by the iPhone X's true-depth camera. I'll just also say here, I'm really happy I'm proceeding from Alvaro and his colleagues' work, because I think there's a really nice set of synergies between this presentation and his. And as he mentioned, the iPhone true-depth camera is just one example of facial recognition technology that's becoming more and more standard in commercial smartphones. So the presenter of that animated panda claimed that Animojis track more than 50 muscle movements, necessary because, of course, the iPhone is also, through its Face ID system, your face is also your password. And the technical details of this is that the iPhone projects thousands of dots onto your face. They're infrared light, and that's how it matches your face in real time. So what might have been presented solely as a security feature became, with Animoji, a social and emotional affordance, a seemingly playful expansion of digital animations, from emoji to stickers to all sorts of things that you will use on your phones every day, which now suffuse our mediated lives. So this is part of a larger project that I'm thinking about around the role of animation as a form of expression in social media today. And digital animations like Animoji are instances in which technical phenomena serve to translate moments of emotional expression into socially legible forms, right, through particular contingent models of legibility, classification, and discrimination. Here's an example. These are Snapchat facial masks, right? So masking across social media is also an important element of these technologies, and also uses the facial recognition data from your phone. In fact, when you're using these masks, you're training the facial recognition data for the companies you're using. Now, I use the term discrimination in its double meaning. So affect theorist Xian Nai argues persuasively in her influential book, Ugly Feelings, that to be animated in American culture is to be racialized in some way. Other scholars, such as Lisa Nakamura, who I've quoted here, have detailed the ways racial categorizations are built into the logic of digital systems of classification and enumeration. So Nakamura points out, computing's cultural history is intimately connected to the history of racial classification and sorting. So what I'm arguing here today is that digital artifacts for emotional expression, like Animoji, create and maintain racializing categories through the technical, formal, and aesthetic mechanisms by which they represent human identity. I'm not saying here that the designers of these systems are necessarily themselves racially biased, either explicitly or even covertly. It's that the technical mechanisms themselves of classification, right, what somebody earlier today mentioned as feature vectors, right, can't help but produce these racializing categories that reinforce extant forms of racial bias. It's not entirely your fault, you just can't get away from it. And I'm going to tie this back to Alvaro and his colleagues' presentation before the break, right? You've heard about who tech is used on, you've heard about who is in the database. There are all sorts of powerful research coming out about how those elements of facial recognition have racial biases and have disparate impact against especially African Americans. And I agree with that, and I'm totally there for that work. Here I'm digging into how and why the databases themselves, as technical systems, produce and suggest racial bias. Okay. So just to get some definitions out, on the table, racialization, as Maria Maldonado describes it, is the production, reproduction of, and contest over racial meanings and the social structures in which such meanings become embedded. And I really want to acknowledge the amazing work of many scholars before me, many of whom are women and or people of color, who've done work thinking about race and facial recognition. So someone like Simone Brown has observed that facial recognition technologies and other systems like them are already agents of these essentializing practices. I'm also going to give a shout out to my Cambridge, my Berkman colleague, Joy Bolawini's work at MIT, who has looked at leading facial recognition companies' commercial AI systems that often misgender women, and especially women of color. But I think what's led me to think about race and animation and facial recognition is the way that animations are getting paired with these facial recognition technologies in social media. Right? So animation itself has a long racial history, and it differs from other forms of representation of the human by being what anthropologist Terry Silvio calls a set of ciphers. Representations through which specific formal qualities stand in for specific character traits. And this is what we mean when we say cartoony, right? That's something that's cartoony, it's animated. And so animation has often lent itself to racist caricature, from the present going all the way back to the famous Steamboat Willie Disney cartoon of the 1920s. I was also very happy to hear Pierre in the previous session talk about Lombroso and Bertillon and these other French physiognomists of the late 19th century, because the reduction of people to a collection of abstract elements, a set of legible signs, is also a hallmark of this kind of modern and contemporary administrative worldview that those thinkers engage with. And this is a sort of an example of a kind of racist or racial expression of that kind of animation, this idea that you can tell somebody's intelligence by the shape of their face. As a number of other scholars have documented, these worldviews seek to classify, and through classifying, interpret and control, by setting the epistemological terms, the kinds of knowledge on which these interpretations can take place, and the technical formats through which those interpretations happen. A nice place to sort of think about this, this problem of race and classification and animation, is in work in digital game studies. So there has been a lot of work in game studies that attest to the ways in which animation perpetuates racializing classifications, even in the context of fantasy worlds where there are no quote-unquote real-world races, right? So in this context, right, fantastic or non-illusionistic animations are as problematic for racializing potential as those grounded in the physiological mapping of real, quote-unquote, real human faces. Nakamura has also written extensively on the ways that digital databases create and reproduce these racializing logics. This is a great example. This is from the game World of Warcraft, and it's kind of giving you a kind of racial set of all the races in World of Warcraft. And of course, in World of Warcraft and many other games, races and racial characteristics give you different powers, right? Like you play one race for one reason, you play another race for another reason, and there's been a lot of interesting work in digital technologies that thinks about that kind of the problematicness of that set of associations. So emotion is an important vector for classifying the face. Animated media objects necessitate the schematization of human feelings as a result of the very semiotic emptiness that makes them amenable to human emotional projection. And by which I mean, we have these simplified emotional categories like emoji. These are some animated emoji. So these are animated Facebook reaction icons. And because they're so simple, we're able to do a lot with them in our social lives. I won't go into detail on this aspect of the project, but it's enough to say that one of the main mechanisms for doing facial coding around emotion is the facial action coding system, which was developed by Paul Ekman. One of those influential components of contemporary facial recognition software, and it's also used by digital animation systems around computer-generated CGI graphics. And I just put this up here because you may not know that the 5 basic human universal emotions at the top, those are Ekman's 5 emotions. They're the same emotions as the emotions in the Pixar film Inside Out, and they're also the same emotions as in the Facebook reaction icon, and it's because Ekman consulted on the latter 2 projects. So it's all Ekman all the way down. So facial recognition, animation, and classification systems enact this process that Simone Brown calls digital epidermalization, or the imposition of race on the body, through this classification and schematization of human facial features. Right. So this is an image from a CGI textbook, and you'll notice the similarity between this kind of point-based engagement with the face and the True ID iPhone X camera. And these are some of the patents from Apple's technologies, where you can sort of see this is how they do it. But what's more interesting, right, again, is just this way that the idea of classifying human features around emotion, around the face, pervades all of these systems, right? So these are some patents that Apple filed last year for what they call an avatar management system, and you can do things like move where the eyes are. They can be farther apart or closer together. And again, of course, there's nothing explicitly racialized or racist within the technology per se, but because this technology isn't in a vacuum, it's impossible to extricate it from the social racial biases that we go through every day. And of course, as these representations become more and more realistic, so to speak, these problems only persist. This is a weird one. There's a teapot in front of this guy's face. It's a strange patent. So these technologies are what historian Carlo Ginzburg has termed, quote, the conjectural model of the human sciences. In such a model, technologies and techniques are put to work to determine an interior reality from external clues, in a play of correspondences variously, sometimes defined as causal, sometimes correlational, sometimes both. There's a lot of slippage in those discourses. And again, I'm not arguing that there aren't differences between people, either in the way we look or the way we act, but that often the differences that we look for in people may not be, there may be answers to the wrong questions, right? There may be answers to previously existing social bias that we haven't fully thought through. A good practical example of this, it was the famous Face app Hot filter, which, when applied to African Americans, made them look more Caucasian and both in skin tone and in facial features. And someone mentioned earlier Foucault, and Foucault's whole notion of biopolitics and biopolitical is actually quite tied to race, and the way that race becomes a kind of differentiator that allows these technical systems to operate. So of course race is a social construct, right? Population differences are not related to the extant social categories of race and racial bias that exist in our world. And there was a really great op-ed in BuzzFeed, of all places, but a really good op-ed talking about this in the context of genetic testing. And I think you can generally replace facial recognition with genetic testing in these arguments and have the same kind of conversation. So, there are lots of other issues with Animoji, right? Apple is collecting the data that we as users produce from it. It's tracking us all the time, as Derek Hutchinson said earlier. With Animoji, an animated character ventriloquizes the phone user directly to train Apple's facial recognition systems and collect ever more granular data regarding the user's emotional expression. But I think more broadly, Animoji represent a concentration of animation's racializing logics because they're both cute and they're also specific, right? They bring together this granular facial recognition system with this kind of, cute animated panda kind of thing. And this mobilization draws people in to use these systems and also masks the fact that there's a lot of very sophisticated granular surveillance happening. So digital animations now pervade our lives, right? They're everywhere, and they're capable of rendering these logics of racializing privilege ever more perverse, precisely because they enlist multiple different technologies all the time, right? So we are interacting with all sorts of different animated agents on our phones, and all of them are kind of like working within these models that we don't really know about, and which may have all sorts of strange racial correlations built into them. And I think the Cambridge Analytica scandal has been a really strong signal that, in fact, not only do people not appreciate the complexities of the costs and benefits around these technologies, but it's also because companies don't really want to tell them about them. And I think Mark Zuckerberg's performance last week really made that clear. So to end on a happier note, there are, I think, further study of these digital forms of emotional expression and animation and visual recognition is definitely needed to explore how some of these racializing tendencies within databases can be perhaps pushed back on, gotten rid of, ameliorated, and also how they can be resisted, right? So this was the work of a New York artist named Adam Harvey, and this is called CD Dazzle, it's from a few years ago. It's makeup that allows you to avoid being tracked by the kind of point-based facial recognition technologies that many companies and governments use. And that's it, thank you.